This day in sports history. This episode is brought to you by the Sterling Soap Company. Sterling Soap is 100% natural and with a variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, cologne, and many more personal care products in a large variety of scents, you're sure to find something that's perfect for you or that special someone in your life. Check them out at sterlingsoap.com. It's September 7th, and on this day throughout the years, we had a couple of wild finishes to football games delivered from some rather unlikely heroes. There was a brand new sports network that debuted to replay those incredible finishes, and a 19th century protest that led to the Dodgers becoming a National League team. But let's start with what happened on this day in 1980, when one of those unlikely people scored the winning touchdown, and maybe the most unlikely of all. It was a classic NFC Central matchup in Week 1 between the Chicago Bears and the Green Bay Packers at Lambeau Field. Well, it was classic only in the fact that these two teams were divisional foes and they went back a long way. The game itself, through the first 60 minutes, they should have issued a refund. There were a combined 5 turnovers, neither team approached 200 yards passing, and there were 17 penalties. Walter Payton had just 65 yards on the ground. The Packers' Eddie Lee Ivory had just 73. And scoring? Nearly non-existent. The game was tied at 6 at the end of regulation. The game nearly ended on a safety on the first possession of overtime. The Bears got the ball first and went backwards. If not for the elusive Peyton pulling a Houdini act in the end zone, the game would have ended on that weird note. Of course, the way this game had been going, that may have been appropriate. Instead, there was a much more interesting and strange way that this game was destined to end. The Packers drove down within the field goal range of Chester Marcol, who'd already hit 2 on the day. And that is when this game got interesting.
It's blocked. Taken by Marcol. Chester Marcol. Chester Marcol. Chester Marcol takes it in. Can you believe it? Chester Marcol have won the football game. I can't believe it. A touchdown run. A touchdown run of 25 yards for Chester Marcol.
The kick was blocked, but it bounced perfectly right back in the hands of the bespectacled and unassuming Chester Marcol, who took off around the left end for the 25-yard touchdown to give the Packers the 12-6 win. On this day in 2003, Jake Delhomme made his magical debut for the Carolina Panthers. This was Week 1 of the 2003 season. The 2 1995 expansion teams, the Panthers and Jacksonville Jaguars, were playing in Charlotte. John Fox was in his second year at the helm, and the man who'd been his defensive coordinator the previous year, Jack Del Rio, was on the opposite sideline as the new head coach of the Jaguars. In Fox's first season, he'd turned around a 1-15 joke of a team to a decent 7-9 middle-of-the-road squad with veteran QB Rodney Peete leading the way on the offensive side. When the 2003 season started, Peete was once again the starter, but that lasted all of one half of one game. Peete struggled in the first 30 minutes of this one, going 4 for 10 through the air for just 19 yards, and he'd been sacked 3 times. The Panthers trailed 14-0 at the break. Not all the fault of Peete, but the team needed a shot of adrenaline, and maybe a little Louisiana hot sauce would do the trick. When Jake Delhomme trotted onto the field in the third quarter, Jacksonville had just added a field goal to make it 17-0. The Panthers rode Stephen Davis down the field, but it was Delhomme who got them to pay dirt.
High formation, play action, Delhomme. Oh, what a shot right down the middle. Muhammad, touchdown, Carolina.
In the fourth quarter, Carolina added a John Casey field goal, and then Rod Smart, a.k.a. He Hate Me, blocked a punt that got booted out of the end zone for a safety, and the Jags' lead was down to just 17-12. The Panthers got the ball back, and Delhomme went back to work.
Mangum in motion to tight end. Delhomme steps up, throws. Got it! Touchdown! You gotta be kidding. Steve Smith.
Panthers went for 2, didn't get it, but they led for the first time on the day at 18-17. But the fireworks were not over. There were a whole lot more left. The Jags responded with an aerial assault of their own.
Good protection. Brunell lets it fly. Caught! Jermaine Lewis! He's going! Touchdown, Jacksonville!
Jags went for 2 as well, and they failed. So now with a little over 5 minutes to play, Jags were up 5. Delhomme threw a pick on the next possession, but the Panther D got him the ball back with plenty of time on the clock for a final drive. Facing a 4th down and 11 from the Jags 12 with 22 seconds left, the Panthers were down to their final play. But there was still a little bit of Delhomme voodoo magic left.
Hader, 22 ticks on the clock. Delhomme. Good protection, throws in the end zone. Touchdown! Ricky Prohl!
Panthers went for 2 again, didn't get it. 24-23 Carolina. There were still 16 seconds left on the clock. Brunell put Jacksonville kicker Seth Marler in position to be a hero with a 55-yard field goal try, but for the second time that day, the Panthers' special teams came up with the block to preserve the 1-point come-from-behind win. And that was the start of an incredible ride for the Panthers. They would end that season with an 11-5 record, an amazing playoff run that followed, and an appearance in Super Bowl 38, 4.5 months later. All sparked with a little bit of Cajun spice on this day. And of course, the highlights from those games were shown on ESPN, which debuted on this day in 1979.
If you're a fan, what you'll see in the next minutes, hours, and days to follow may convince you you've gone to sports heaven.
Those words from Lee Leonard were the first words uttered on the newest cable channel that debuted on this day in 1979. The idea for the Entertainment and Sports Programming Network, or as it would soon be called, ESPN, came to Bill Rasmussen in 1978 after he lost his job as the communications director of the New England Whalers. Initially, his idea was to start a very local cable network focusing on sports just in Connecticut. This was just about the time that cable television began to expand. In the late 70s, only about 10 to 20% of homes had cable. Most people had an antenna on their house and aimed it toward local television stations to bring the signal into their homes. A few had a huge satellite dish out in their yard, but the idea of a wire running into your house, bringing multiple channels from not only your immediate area, but from all over the country, now that was something. So here on the cusp of the explosion of cable TV, Rasmussen began to think bigger. So along with his son Scott and Ed Egan, an insurance guy, they started looking for a place to put the roots of their business. Initially, they chose Plainville, Connecticut as home base, but the town did not allow satellite dishes on building rooftops, and so they settled into Bristol instead. Getty Oil was an early backer of the venture and helped Rasmussen buy the land to build what would become an empire. Anheuser-Busch provided a big boost in the spring of '79, inking a $1 million deal to be the only beer advertiser on the network. After Leonard introduced the world, which at that time really was about 30,000 people tuned in to watch the debut, but once he introduced those folks to ESPN, he introduced George Grand. Grand was seated at what would become the showcase of the fledgling network, the SportsCenter anchor desk. He launched into a half-hour highlight show with Chris Everett's 6-1, 6-love U.S. Open semifinal win over Billie Jean King as the first highlight and score given. At the end of the first ever SportsCenter, they tossed to a men's slow-pitch softball game featuring the Milwaukee Schlitz and the Kentucky Bourbons. And they were off. There was a little bit of a struggle in the early going, finding enough live sports to broadcast. After acquiring the rights to show college basketball, ESPN showcased the NCAA men's basketball tournament, bringing in the recently fired Detroit Pistons coach Dick Vitale to be the analyst. Of course, it's grown into the behemoth that we know today, which is available in what's estimated to be about 70 million households in the U.S. On this day in 1889, the St. Louis Browns lit candles of protest in a game with the Brooklyn Bridegrooms. The Browns and Bridegrooms were in a heated chase for the pennant. After trailing for most of the season, Brooklyn had finally caught up and taken a 1.5-game lead. 15,000 spectators had piled in to see this Saturday game, and as was normal then, play started at 4 p.m. It was an overcast day, though, with dark clouds hovering in the area, blotting out the sun and making it darker than usual at Washington Park in Brooklyn. And of course, with no lights to turn on to illuminate the field, there was a small time window to get this game in. Both teams knew how much every game meant in this late-season 3-game series. Brooklyn had a 2-1 lead in the 5th inning, and they began to slow the pace of the game down considerably now that the game was official. And they kept yelling at umpire Fred Goldsmith to call the game due to darkness. Now, Goldsmith understood these tactics, having played the game himself in Chicago. When the Browns plated a couple of runs in the 6th, it was their turn to go into time-wasting mode, and they began pleading with Goldsmith to call it. There were arguments after every play, again, more to delay than to arbitrate a bad call. Goldsmith started handing out fines and warned that the game would be forfeited if the Browns didn't start moving quicker. A Browns player dunked the game ball into a bucket of water at one point to make it tougher to hit, and that infuriated Goldsmith, and he put a new ball into play. The 7th inning began around 5:40 in the evening, with waning light providing just enough illumination to see. Browns owner Chris Vonderay sent a young lad to purchase some candles at a local store. When he returned, the game was now in the 8th inning. The Browns players lit up those candles and put them in front of the dugout as a form of protest to Goldsmith that there just wasn't enough light to play. By this point, Goldsmith was furious and he refused to pause the game, pressing on into the 9th when it truly was too dark to see. The first batter struck out but went to first after the St. Louis catcher didn't hold on to the ball, mostly because he couldn't see it. After a ball got past the catcher again, the Browns walked off the field in protest, leading the game 4-2. Some of the players were pelted with bottles as they walked off. The Brooklyn fans were furious and they were ready to riot. Goldsmith waited 5 minutes, and when St. Louis did not return, he called it a forfeit for Brooklyn. Now, here's the thing. They were scheduled to play Game 2 of the series the next day, on a Sunday, and as you've heard me talk about before, many towns and cities had restrictions about playing on Sunday. At this point in time, Brooklyn had petitioned the city to be allowed to play Sunday games, but while that process was ongoing, there would be no police presence at any Sunday ball games. With an infuriated crowd screaming for blood and a game with no security in place on the table for the next day, the Browns also refused to play the Sunday game, forfeiting that game as well. An appeal was made to league officials who ruled 2 weeks later to overturn Goldsmith's verdict on this day, giving the Browns the win, but upholding the forfeit for their refusal to play on Sunday. That angered Brooklyn, and the American Association's compromise ruling eventually led to Brooklyn leaving the American League and joining the National League. And as you may have figured, the Brooklyn Bridegrooms eventually became the Brooklyn Dodgers, who are now the Los Angeles Dodgers. Time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. A 16th century jester avoided execution with a witty rejoinder. The man, named Triboulet, found himself in a spot of bother after smacking King Francis I on the behind. The king was not amused by that, and he demanded an apology. Triboulet responded, "Pardon me, your majesty, I thought thou was the queen." Well, that pissed the king off even more, and he ordered Triboulet's execution. But since the man had worked in service of the court for a long time, the king allowed Triboulet to choose the manner of his execution, to which he responded, "Good sire, I choose to die from old age." That finally amused the king, and he pardoned Triboulet. He was banished instead. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.